Welcome back to the Donkey Vote Political Podcast for another interview. And today we have the honor of interviewing former Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack. Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, George, Tobias, and Francis. Great to be with you.
Just for our viewers out there who may not know who you are you able to give us a little brief explanation of yourself just before we get into the questions?
Sure. Well, my name is Michael McCormack. I am I've got a record. I've got a message coming in. That doesn't matter, does it?
No, don't worry about that. It's fine.
No, you can't
Just
see it? Right, okay.
yeah.
Sorry. Okay, so my name is Michael McCormack. I'm the federal member for Riverina. So Riverina is in southwest New South Wales. It encompasses an area between Euron Creek in the south and Peak Hill in the north, Tullamore. It takes in the major city of Wagga Wagga, which is the largest inland city in New South Wales. It is a federation seat, although it was called Riverina Darling between 1983 and 1994 or thereabouts. But to all intents and purposes, the name Riverina has always been a seat in the federal parliament. And that's pretty unusual. It's also pretty unusual that it's not named after somebody. It's one of those rare seats that's named after a geographical area, supposedly between the Murrumbidgee and Murray rivers, although the boundaries do not reflect that these days. In 2016, there was a redistribution and the boundaries went away from the old west of Narrandera, the Murrumbidgee irrigation area, right up through to the central west. And so I tell people I'm the member for Riverina in central west because people in Parkes and Forbes and Cowra don't really relate to Wagga Wagga or the name Riverina. So look, it's a great electorate. It's got a little bit of everything. We grow everything: stock, sheep, cattle, obviously grain. Canola is huge here, but we've also unusually, Wagga Wagga is the home of all three armed services. So we've got military bases, important training bases, and we're the only regional inland city with all three arms of the defence. So that gives you a bit of a précis of the electorate. And I've been the member for Parliament since 2010.
That's really good to hear. I don't think many of our viewers would have known a lot about the Riverina area in general. So thank you there, Michael, for giving us a little brief description on your whole little insight. Yeah. We'll now get started with our questions. So my first question to you, Michael, is how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments?
Well, here's an interesting fact. I didn't go to university. I went straight to journalism from school. Back in those days, jobs, particularly the jobs that you absolutely wanted, were of a premium, and you were lucky to get a job, and particularly in journalism. And when the opportunity came up, I was working part-time at the paper during year 11, and when the opportunity came up, I grabbed it. So I didn't go to university. I did, I suppose, my training on the beat. I did my training with some of the finest country journalists in Australia, people such as Barry Flanagan and Brian Junk and others, and I did a 4-year cadetship. Interestingly, Warren Truss, when he was making his farewell valedictory speech in 2018, mentioned the fact that he said, I will be the last Deputy Prime Minister in this country, probably standing here at the dispatch box, without a university degree. He said, how times have changed. He said, these days with so many people and politicians certainly going to university, I'll be the last of my kind. And yet it wasn't 18 months later, I was standing in the same spot, talking about aspects of regional living, and I also was somebody, a deputy prime minister no less, who had not been to university. So just because you don't go to university, or just because you might get the ATAR mark that you're after, or the equivalent thereof in Victoria or elsewhere, it won't define you as a person. It won't stop you from reaching, perhaps, if you like, your potential. This country, you don't have to be rich or well connected to walk the highest offices in the land, to walk the corridors of power in Parliament. You just need to work hard, be a little bit lucky, and to be the right person in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. And I think that just defines the whole Australian spirit and the whole way of life that we have here as well. And another interesting fact as well, I think the current leader of the Nationals, David Littleproud, he didn't go to university either, didn't he?
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. So I guess Warren was wrong because of the next three deputy prime ministers, two of them didn't go to university. So
Well, there you go. Well, David hasn't quite got deputy prime minister yet, but we're working hard to win back
yeah,
government.
I mean, leader
And
of the Nationals, I guess, in that
yes,
sense.
yes, and so we're working hard to win back government. Who can tell what might happen at the next election?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? The polls leaning towards 50-50. I think that's what they said yesterday. It was 50-50 two party preferred. So who knows
The
what could
polls
happen in the
also
next.
the polls also said the Voice was going to succeed for a long time. I've always thought about polls. If you don't like one poll, well, wait, there'll be another one next week or next month. There's only one poll that matters, and that's the poll at the ballot box on election day. It's the only poll I've ever actually looked at and really worried about. People can, I can remember Tony Abbott had 30 bad opinion polls, and Malcolm Turnbull set him that task, and of course Malcolm got 30 bad opinion polls. So it's generally it's hard as a prime minister to keep up the preferred PM rating in an opinion poll. People tend to be rather cynical in those sorts of things, but it doesn't necessarily carry over to an actual vote when they get that pencil in hand and the ballot paper in that little ballot booth on election day. They can very quickly change their mind.
Yeah, and I think a great example of that is the 2019 federal election. All the lead-up polls were saying Bill Shorten and the Labor Party are going to win that election, and Scott Morrison proved them wrong.
I think he had the carpets measured in the lodge, but I knew we were going to win that, and I think so did Scott. I think we were the only two in Australia who thought we were going to win that election, and we were proven correct.
Yeah. We'll now move on to our second question. George.
Yep. So prior to your parliament, you worked as a journalist, specifically for the Daily Advertiser newspaper in Wagga Wagga. How was it starting there on your cadetship, and do you recommend journalism as a career option?
I would. I can well remember my very first week at the Daily Advertiser. I was only 17 at the time, and we had this fellow who had an interesting habit of knocking people's coffee cups over the first year cadets' copy paper. But this was back in the days of the typewriter. I always made sure when I became a long time ago. I always made sure that when I started as the editor and when I was the boss. Later on as in my company, I always treated the youngest person on the staff as well as anybody. And interestingly, when the census went to the way it did in that press conference, which was rather testy, there were two of my first year cadets, James Wagstaff and Shane Wright, in that audience who, let's just say, they remembered the favours I'd done them by asking relatively easy questions on what was a very difficult day and a very difficult press conference. But newspapers these days, they're under challenge. The media pie is only so big and there's so much competition for people's interest, for people's time. My newspaper, the Daily Advertiser, it's been going since October 1868, still printing an edition. It's nowhere near as large as what it used to be. There used to be 230 people at work at the Daily Advertiser. Indeed, I had in the Riverina Media Group, I had a newsroom and news editors and sub-editors, etc., journalists, reporters, photographers, numbering 58. That would be unheard of these days. And I was the editor at 26. Again, that'd probably be unheard of. So they were heady days. We were transferring from black and white to colour, basically from typewriters to computers, and the full computerisation pagination took place while I was the editor. So they were fun times. They were interesting days. It did set me up, I think, well when I became an MP, to know the sorts of questions that would be fired at you, to have an idea of what the community expectations were and the trends within your own local area. And so I've always prided myself on being ahead of the game in that regard. And as I said, because Wagga is a city where there's a little bit of everything, and it really is a microcosm of Australia, basically, I've always been able to sort of know what's going to happen or trending within the country. And that gives me a good insight into how people are thinking on a social level, on a political issue level. And it's been good. It's been a good career to then springboard off being a politician.
Yeah, because I think in a lot of senses as well, journalism and politics are kind of similar, just in the sense that, you're trying to gauge your community's issue, the importance of their issues in the community and what things they want changed. And, you have to talk to your community, I guess, and interact with people,
Well, you know
that
when
sort of
there's
thing.
going to
Which
be, when there's a hot button issue, and you can also, and I must say, I knew that the Voice, right almost from the outset, was not going to be the success that many of the mainstream metropolitan media outlets were suggesting it was. I gathered that certainly in regional Australia, the view was vastly different, and I think that view then overtook what may have been trending early in the piece in metropolitan Australia. But I so often the metropolitan media, they get caught up in their own little bubble in Canberra, and it doesn't always reflect about what's going on and what's being thought elsewhere in Australia,
I think
in
that
my
is,
view.
yeah, I think that's also a pretty big issue, just because, people sometimes forget that there are regional Australians and there is a lot of them as well. And since we're all caught up in our bubbles, sometimes I'm even sadly part of this as well. Like, I forget there's regional communities outside of Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane, and these major cities. So I think it's a big issue, especially within news media.
Oh, and the divide between city and country, you like to think it's not wide, but sometimes it is. And sometimes I don't think city folk get or understand where their food comes from. They think that they go to a supermarket and that's where their meat just magically appears in the refrigerator, their milk, their fresh fruit and vegetables, but they're grown in regional Australia. Similarly, the fact that we're able to keep our lights on, to pay for schools, to pay for hospitals, well, that is coming off the back of the resources boom that has been going now for many, many years in our country. And iron ore and coal and so many gas, so many other things that the Treasurer could only bring himself to say the things we sell overseas, he couldn't actually name them. Well, they're the things that come from regional Australia that help make this country great.
Yeah, and especially for us as well, since we live in Point Cook, Tobias and George probably would know as well that we live very close to Werribee South, which produces, I think, 30% of Victoria's fresh vegetables and fruit that's sold in stores. So I guess for us as well, like, we don't realize that we live really close to a lot of regional areas, and Werribee South, I guess, is not necessarily as regional anymore, but it's still a very, very important part of agriculture within Victoria.
Once it was the hub of Victorian horse racing, and of course we all know how important horse racing was, maybe still is, the fifth largest industry in Australia. And I'm a bit of a horse racing aficionado. I don't bet, but certainly love the horse racing
Do you
history.
own
I
any
know
horses,
Werribee.
Michael?
And no, I'm not that silly. I own one of the largest collections of horse racing books, a private library that's second to none in Australia, but certainly I don't race horses. I'm more sensible than that, but I admire those people who do, for the courage and the initiative and the pluck they take to invest in horses. But certainly it's a big industry around Wagga Wagga too, horse racing.
You're not much of that. You're not much of a risk taker then, that in that sense.
Oh no, I take risks. I'm the first to take a risk, but I've always found there are more important things to spend money on than horses and boats. They say, people tell me who have them both. It's a good way to good way to spend some leisure hours, but also very expensive. But I don't have too many leisure hours in my job, so I haven't gone down that path. Maybe in retirement, a long way off.
Yeah, maybe in retirement. Yeah. We'll move on to our third question. Tobias.
Yeah, you were also appointed Justice for Peace in New South Wales in 1999. Are you able to talk about the walk of justice the walk
Well,
of a justice peace in New South Wales?
Well, being a justice of the peace in entitles you, I suppose, to be able to sign people's paperwork and to follow procedures as far as identifying people, to sign affidavits and all those sorts of things. Look, I did it back in 1999 because I thought there weren't too many JPs in Wagga Wagga, etc., and I thought, well, I'll do it. I'll be honest with you, I haven't had to sign a lot of paperwork because I've always been rather too busy in this job now. But it's like, I suppose, many of the TAFE courses that I did, I just did it to better myself, to have an understanding of process and protocol. I've had to help a few people through a few form filling out, to be able to help them to, get identified or get the necessary paperwork for legal and professional things that they needed. And so that's where it's come in handy. I like the fact that this office has always had a JP for people walking off the street to be able to sign their necessary forms and paperwork. And it's just been one of those strings to my bow, which I thought back in '99 that I would do, just to have as something on your CV that you said you do. And it's, I suppose it represents I suppose somebody who is wanting to contribute to their community, and that's somebody who I've always tried to be.
Yeah. How was the application process to become Justice of Peace?
Oh,
Was
you
it
have to
pretty hard?
Yeah, well, back when I did it, you had to seek endorsement from the sitting state member of Parliament, so the New South Wales Parliament in my case, which back then was Darryl Maguire. And then you had to get a form filled out at the local police station, some referees, people who were professions such as doctors or lawyers, and then apply for it. And if you were lucky enough, you received it. A little bit more onerous these days. You actually have to do an online test. I did that it was probably now a good couple of years ago now, to continue being a JP. It's just one of those things that's just a string to your bow, I suppose, that you do that. So and you're entitled to use the initials JP after your name. I never have, but I'm a Justice of the Peace, so it's all well and good.
Yeah, maybe that's something that myself, Tobias, or George could be doing down the line in the next couple of years. I don't know if that's
okay. Good. Yeah, look, it's just contributing to your community, to society.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, we'll now move on to our fourth question. George.
Right before running for Parliament, you owned and operated your own media and publishing business in Wagga Wagga. What type of work were you able to do in this media and publishing business, and is it something you wish to continue after your political career?
Well, I left the newspaper in 2002. We had to do something. There was only one editor's task in the newspaper, and so I knew that wasn't going to continue happening. So I had to, if I was going to stay in Wagga Wagga, and we just built a new home here, then I was going to have to find my own career path and forge my way ahead there. And so with my brother-in-law, Stephen Shaw, and a former work colleague in Phil Sheather, we started MSS Media. So MSS being McCormack, Sheather and Shaw, or Media Services and Solutions, take your pick. And we started very small. We built it up to quite the little small business. We, in fact, the work that we were able to garner through advertising and through the Motor Traders Association, through state MPs, both Liberal and National Party in New South Wales, and through other means, I wasn't able to park my car in my garage for some years because we'd filled it up with brochures that we'd printed for all of those people and all those organisations over the period that I was involved. So I was involved for the 8 years, 2002 to 2010, when I then sought a career in Parliament. But the business only just stopped when Phil decided to retire there a couple of years ago, and my brother-in-law moved on to other endeavours. But so it lasted a good 19, 20 years. So that's successful, because a lot of small businesses don't last that long in Australia. But we worked hard, and I've always found in small business, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Yeah, and I believe that 99% of small businesses, or like small business in general, just fail before they even get picked up. So
it's tough, and and it's onerous, and you have to work, and quite often you end up paying your workers. Well, you have to pay them first. You have to obviously invest for the future. You have to put aside sometimes family time and other things. But look, we made it work. We made it happen, and it was a very good business, and it set me up, because that. Talking about risk taking a little earlier, that's where you do take the biggest risks, and small business people, they're the biggest risk takers in Australia. My hat goes off to them, and my heart goes out to them. And that's why when I became the Small Business Minister, I made sure that they are working with the Treasurer. They got the biggest tax cut they've got. The small business tax rate went down to its lowest level since the 1940s. And we put in place that instant asset write-off. And even when I was the Deputy Prime Minister, I made sure around the Cabinet table that we made that instant asset write-off unlimited during COVID as a boost for the economy. It's now back to $20,000, and I know Labor spruiks about that. Well, it was unlimited under the coalition, so I don't want to get too political, but it's something that I've always tried to do, was foster small businesses in any way I could at a local level, but also very much at the highest level in the country.
Yeah, and small business is the backbone of Australia. So the more we can,
indeed, it is.
The more we can do to support them, the better. And also with your just to go back towards your small business that you did run yourself, you did talk a little bit about how you had to work a lot with, and you did, prepare a lot of newspaper articles and that sort of thing for state politicians and for state, national and Liberal politicians. Did that help you as well run for Parliament and gain a greater, I guess, scope within Liberal and national politics? So they kind of knew who you were before you ran in 2010?
Indeed, absolutely. And look, I'd go out with them in the field, and I'd prepare them for interviews. I'd do all their brochures, their publications, their newsletters, and also troubleshoot where needed. And that really did set me up for then having a tilt myself, and thankfully I was successful. But probably was able to hit the ground running a little bit sooner and stronger than some of my political rivals. So, that certainly did help. Yep.
Yeah, so we'll move on to our next question. So who would you say is your political role model / idol?
Well, I'd make that a plural, and there are several. Obviously, Kay Hull had a big part to play. She was the former federal member for Riverina for 12 years before I was elected. So she tapped me on the shoulder and was very influential in helping me to get elected in the first place. I have to say Warren Truss was very good as the leader of the Nationals, very staid, very solid, very across his brief. Warren would never, gain the headlines for being, going out on a limb on anything, but he knew his stuff. And, if we don't want politicians to be personalities, we just want politicians to get the job done. And Warren Truss was very effective in that regard. Brendan Nelson was the best Prime Minister we never had. I'm still very, very good mates with Brendan Nelson, the former Liberal leader, former War Memorial Director. We share very much an interest in that regard. Julia Gillard, I picked the phone up and asked her what was the best bit of advice that she could give me when I first became Deputy Prime Minister, and she spent half an hour with me on the phone, coaching me and mentoring me, and I very much still appreciate the fact that she reached out, and she was always very, very good in that regard. People might find that strange to believe, but
that's interesting. Yeah.
And this one, Simon Crean, I cried the night he died. Simon Crean was the former Labor leader who was so good to me when I first got into politics. He took me under his wing. He helped me in so many regards. We had some good times together, but he didn't need to. I was a backbencher from the National Party from Victoria, so I was a different state, different party. I was a backbencher. He was very much a cabinet minister. Why he reached out to me to this day, I don't know, but I respect and value the fact that he did, and he helped me in so many ways that people will never know. I think that's great. And I've tried to do the same since stepping back from the Deputy Prime Minister's job, obviously not through not of my own volition, but I've really reached out to a number of the Labor women in particular to help them. People like Emma McBride and Christy McBain and Sharon Clayton and others. I've tried to help and provide advice in any way, shape or form that I can, because I think the Parliament needs to have that. And the death of Peter Murphy just recently was so tragic. She had so much more to give. She was a former Kringle High Wagga Wagga girl. Her and I had some some interesting conversations. I went to a lot of time and effort to try to deliver the very best condolence motion that I could, and I was very humbled by the fact that her husband, Rod Glover, mentioned me in his eulogy to her at her funeral service just the other day. Because, and I think the public often doesn't see that because the media doesn't report it, but there are some very close ties between politicians of very much different backgrounds, different political parties. And, you know, I've got some very good friends on the Labor side, some people I would happily be in the trenches with, Steve Georgianis and several others who I really rate so highly. And we work together to bring better outcomes for all Australians. And I think that's what politicians should be doing. It's not always the argy-bargy of just trying to political point score. It has to be about being there when others need you, other human beings need you, irrespective of their political stripe.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've got out of doing these interviews as well that we've conducted before. So a couple of weeks ago, me, Tobias, and George, and one of our other friends, Brian, we went to State Parliament in Victoria, and we never actually realised how close, in a lot of senses, a lot of the coalition MPs and the Labor MPs were. Like, you know, you see, as you said before, you see in the media that, like, you know, they're two different sides in politics. They don't get along in any way possible.
Well, here's a
different
little
sections of
interesting
society.
snapshot. Scott Morrison as Prime Minister, when everybody thought they needed 10 rolls of toilet paper every time they went to the toilet during COVID, we couldn't get trucks over the border. Now, I had a very long Zoom meeting with Mark Bailey, the Queensland Labor Transport Minister, and Jacinta Allen at the time, the Labor Transport Minister for Victoria, and others, of course. But the three of us mainly put in place a logistics code, which the very next day had trucks not being held up at interstate borders, and there was the free flow of traffic. Now, Jacinta the other day, of course, became the Premier of Victoria, and unfortunately for Mark Bailey, he went the other way and lost his cabinet spot in the reshuffle when Stephen Miles became Premier. I've spoken to both of those on the day, and both of them contacted me back, and we had good long conversations and text backwards and forwards. And I do regard them as friends. I do. Now, that might come as a shock to some of my colleagues. It might come as a shock to some of your viewers, but I rate both of them very highly. And look, yes, there's always going to be controversy and people won't agree with all the decisions made and people always try and tear politicians down. But at the time, Mark Bailey and Jacinta Allen put their politics aside and did what was best in the national interest. And I will always have very fond and high opinions of both of them for that reason, and I'd be more than happy to have either of them home for a barbecue.
Maybe that's something you do on Australia Day later next year, actually.
No, on Australia Day, I jump in the car and I go to every Australia Day event around my electorate. It's very much one of the most important local days of the year, where you just have to turn up. And you do, and I like it.
Exactly.
It's a great day.
And I think, as you said, it's a huge thing as well. Like, people don't understand that, you know, a lot of Labor and Liberal national politicians just get along really well. And I think one of the great things, we did interview Nick McGowan, who's a state Liberal MP for Victoria, and one of the things that he did say in his interview that I took pretty greatly was the fact that, you know, that everyone in politics is basically there to try and make their state or their country a better place, but they have different ways in doing that. But at the end of the day, they'll come to a certain agreement or to I guess a certain, how would I put this? Like, yeah, so come to a certain agreement of how they want, like, they come to a certain agreement between both political parties of where they want the country to go. Like, it may not be set per se like what the Liberal National Party want to do or what the Labor Party want to do directly, but they'll come up with a compromise. Exactly.
For instance, it's the art of compromise. And look, you don't always get what you want in politics, but you sometimes take the greater good rather than the perfect, and you work with that.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll now move on to our next question. Tobias.
Yes. What made you run in the 2010 federal election for the National Party, and what made you join the National Party?
Well, Tobias, I'll answer the second question first because it came first. I joined the National Party in 2003 when I stopped being a journalist. because it was the regional party which I felt best served the interests of my community and people who choose not to live in the bright city lights of metropolitan Australia. And I've always prided myself on the fact that I was somebody who campaigned and advocated for and on behalf of people who do live in country areas, farmers and others who enjoy the country lifestyle. And so it was a natural fit for me. I'd been impressed by the work of John Sullivan and Noel Hicks and Kay Hull as the federal members for Riverina in the recent past. I was impressed with the history of the party, the fact that it started as Australia's basically second oldest political party after the Labor Party, long before the Liberal Party, which started in 1945. But I was impressed by the fact that it had its origins back to the early 1910s, the fact that it was a staunch regional party working for the national interest. And so I put my hand up to I suppose, because having been somebody who'd been a strident campaigner in public life at a local level, I thought, well, if I don't run, I can't then sit back and complain about either the person who actually wins the seat. I can't say, well, I could have done a better job than that. And you don't live with regrets. I risked everything because there was no going back to my small business if I wasn't elected. And so I took the plunge. I put my hand up. I was lucky to be pre-selected against 4 other very good candidates, all of whom would have made good National Party candidates for the Riverina. And then, of course, I went into a 3-quarter contest. The Liberals not only ran, but threw a lot of money at the seat to try and win Riverina for the very first time. Fortunately, our army of supporters were there on the ground, and I always thank them and remember them and honour them for the job that they did, not only back in 2010, but then again in 2013 and 16 and 19 and 22 again, for and on behalf of the National Party, for and on behalf of me to get re-elected. I've been now elected. This is my 5th term. I'm very humbled by that fact, and I'll continue to work hard for the people of the Riverina, irrespective of who they vote for.
That's a good campaign slogan there, Michael.
Well, it's got to be. And honestly, Francis, you probably, this office, I'm in my electorate office in Wagga Wagga now. I've got another one at Parks. They were ringing a couple of times. That was the call I was coming earlier in the piece. But interestingly, I think probably that 3/4 of the traffic through the office and appointments, etc., probably for people who either you don't know their voting intention or would never vote for you. But that doesn't matter. You're not the member for the National Party. You're the member for the Riverina. You're the member for the people who reside in the area and who love and work in the area, and that's what you need to be.
Yeah, I think that's a great point you raised there, because I'm doing an internship currently at my local Liberal MP's office. Yeah, down in Victoria, and we get a lot of people coming in, and a lot of the time I wouldn't expect them to vote for the Liberal Party, but we are the member of our local region, so we have to represent the people as best as possible, and whether their political ideologies and views align with yours, you're still representing them. So you got to do the best for the people.
There's still people, and there's still Australians, and even we do a lot of immigration issues. Always have done. Even when I represented the Murrumbidgee irrigation area, which is almost the cradle of multiculturalism in Australia, so much work is done for people who are trying to gain citizenship, and they're trying to gain citizenship because it is the best country in the world in which to live. And so many people want to get that citizenship paper so they can live and have the full entitlements of being an Australian. And there's a reason for that, because it is the best country.
When he gets drunk on rum and gin, he can't recall a single thing. And though he speaks good Mandarin, he's much more fluent speaking spin. He's got no economic plan, but he can dance with Carrie Ann. stairway to heaven.
Just after a little short ad break, a little coffee break for you viewers out there, get a little coffee. And yeah, now we're just like Michael's done. Now we're back for our last question. So finally, what's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2024, especially those who are starting university or high school?
Just have a go. Just, if there are two roads to take in life, there's a difficult one and an easy one. And the easy one might feel as though you'll get it done quicker, you'll get it done more proficiently and easily. Take the hard road, because it'll make you a better person. I have 3 university students who are working for me. I don't put them on as interns, I put them on as paid people, and they are all doing fabulously well. And I only gave them the opportunity because they bowled on up to me and were outgoing, had the personality and the get up and go and the foresight to actually come up, talk to me, ask me for something. Don't ever be shy to ask, because if you don't ask, you don't get. And sometimes you've got to not just prise doors open, you've got to kick them open. Back yourself always back yourself, and work hard, because you'll get things done much more with the perspiration of your own brow than you will on the back of just happening to know somebody. I know life sometimes is not what they say. It's not what you know until you know, but a little bit of hard work goes a long way, and combine that with a bit of luck. That's how I got where I was. And I was the 18th Deputy Prime Minister of Australia from a little town where when I was growing up, on a good day, there'd be hardly 50 people there. So, you can be anything in this country if you want to be. It's the great land of opportunity. Have a crack, have a go. You'll never know your luck when you actually get in and really pitch yourself and work hard.
Yeah, and I think one of the great quotes that I always use in life is hard work beats talent, because talent still has to work hard. And
that's right. And you got to have that little spark of something, that little X factor, that little, that little bit of ability. But you harness it with hard work, and when you combine those two, and you have a bit of luck along the way, you can be anything in this country. You're not limited by your postcode in Australia.
Exactly. It's a land of opportunity, so always take those opportunities and work hard, because eventually, if you do work hard and you will end up achieving what you want to achieve and being successful in life.
And don't be too disappointed when things don't go your way. Look, I got the sack as a newspaper editor, and after I got the sack as the newspaper editor, and I'd been the editor for 11 years, I'd done what I thought was a very good job. We were the only paper at the time. We had the biggest increased circulation of all the daily papers in Australia, and we got a new general manager in who decided that he was new broom sweeps clean, and got rid of me. And yet I took great comfort from the fact that Walt Disney once was sacked as a newspaper editor / journalist, and I thought, well, if somebody felt for not having the supposed creativity that he needed, so I thought, well, if Walt Disney can get the sack in that regard, well, who knows what I could possibly achieve later in life. And look, don't dwell on your setbacks. Just look to tomorrow, and don't ever look in the rear vision mirror. Just make sure that you forge ahead, and just be nice to other people, because in this day and age, you never know how tough other people are doing it. So just always be nice to people and reach out and try and help them too.
Yeah, and I'll bring another quote from Scott Morrison that I remember from his tenure as Prime Minister. I remember during 2020 during lockdowns, he specifically told, I think it was on a 7:30 interview, he was like, "Don't look down, look up, and look straight ahead and look towards the future." I think I remember him saying that in one interview.
I do like Scott Morrison. One of my greatest regrets, I suppose, is the fact that his reputation has been somewhat maligned or tried to be brought down. Look, Scott did his very, very best as Prime Minister, and I know he and Josh and I formed a very, very close working relationship. We didn't get every call we made right, but then there was no textbook on what to do during COVID. But gee, I tell you what, Australia got through the worst of it in the best possible fashion, thanks to some of the policies that we put in place around that table on those very early mornings and very late dark nights. and Australia should be forever indebted to Scott and his tenure as Prime Minister, and to Josh Frydenberg, who so unfortunately lost his seat of Kooyong at the last federal election. But anyway, onwards and upwards.
Exactly. And yeah, those are all our questions for you, Michael. I'd like to thank you again for joining us for nearly an hour
Thank you,
now.
Francis. Thank you, Tobias, and thank you, George.